Making one stop to check on things. I don't think anything can really move the way I've got it cinched down. Hey, welcome back to Engineer's Workshop. So it's new machine day today. If you could call a 1940s abrasive number 1.5 surface grinder a new machine. But this was a recent acquisition. Price was right, and I basically couldn't pass it up. So condition issues, well, other than age, the ways seem to be pretty decent. I don't see any major scoring. I've got the table down here over to the right, along with the front cover, which I'm glad that it has. Nice to have a machine with all of its covers in place. I'm missing a few here and there on other machines. And I have, I don't know if this is in the shot, but I have a 6 by 18 inch magnetic chuck. The actual table size on this is a 10 by 15, so it's got about 15 inches of travel and a 10 inch front to back. Side to side travel with the big wheel, front to back with the small hand wheel. This little feed box bolts onto the underside. I've got all those fasteners broken free, which are low head cap screws. I absolutely hate low head cap screws, and I'll be replacing those with an alternative that I came up with. Get into that as we get this thing back together. Immediate concerns, it does run, but the spindle, despite being oiled, is kind of stiff. There's ball bearings on the motor, but then in behind the actual wheel, there is a sleeve bearing that is adjustable. So the shaft actually has a polished ground lapped surface that has a very slight taper on it. And then that sleeve bearing can be moved in and out. And I'm assuming it doesn't have to be split, but it's positionable front to back to take up the clearance. And I think it's just run in a little bit too tight. But I've got to get these off. So immediate things I'm going to do is try to get this surface rust cleaned off a bit. I've given this a good opportunity to soak with some Kroil, and I've come up with a way to keep the wheel from turning as I grab this. So let's get into that. Well, my method here to try to get this 2 1/4 inch spanner nut loose is grip the wheel. I've got wood on both sides of it, so the wheel will rock up against the guard itself. And while I don't have a spanner, my biggest channel locks do get in here and grab this. And I think this turns in this direction. So let's see if we have some success here. Yes. So that thing wasn't too tight. I figured you can't tighten but so much against the grinding wheel. The more difficult one's going to be the actual collar that goes behind the wheel with this little spanner. I don't know what I'm going to grab for that. Now I'm going to have to, well, the wheel is loose on the arbor, so that will help getting this off. There it is. There's a notch on that. A little bit of Scotch tape to change the fit on this particular wheel. Underneath, the arbor is nice and clean. It looks like we can hold down to about 1/4-inch wheels. Surprising, but even without heat, just a few taps with a lead hammer and some croil and the wheel guard. It looks like it wants to slide off, but I have a feeling it gets caught because something here is larger diameter. That's a very close fit. Yeah, so this spindle is going to have to come off. And the question is how? How does this spindle lock so that I can turn the collar off? I think this nose piece is a separate piece. I might just put the wheel back on and use the same technique to remove this. Yeah, I definitely think that's just a flat nut retaining the spindle on a threaded stud. And there's a fairly steep taper on this. All the stars are aligning. Look at this. Just a very light touch with 24-inch pipe wrench. Didn't even make marks on the OD. And this is off. I can get some croil into that spindle there. I guess I'll take the spanner back off. I believe it was in this direction. It'd be nice if they had a couple of threaded holes here that you could tap into and push on this. They don't. There's room to get in behind this. Oh, man. Everything about this is going too easy. Tapered hub. And there's the adjustment screws for the bearing cavity. Let's get this out of the way. Yep, definitely. I'm going to power this on because I need to see what spins and what doesn't to kind of get an idea where to go from here. I'm just shooting from the hip. I dialed the VFD down to 40 Hertz. I hope that'll pull the starter in. Okay, so everything spins inside this. I mean, I can grab it and turn it, but it feels stiffer than it really should. Logic tells me this collar tapped into this body here does something with the preload of the bearing, and possibly this ring, because there are two spanner holes here and this ring is threaded, which I believe maybe pushes the shaft in and out. I'd say it's pretty smooth. I don't know if I should try to turn this outer ring while it's running. Let's shut it down. Just seems like it drags itself down to a stop kind of quickly. Shaft isn't getting warm at all. And that finally got freed up. So So is this just like a thrust collar? What do we have here? If I pull it forward, it does drag on the back side of this disc. So this is the adjustment. Question is how to get that to turn and then stay where you leave it. Doing a little indicating with the spindle nose, and I have discovered that I unfortunately have about 1/1000th run out here, and if I take that out to the end, that increases to about 3/1000ths, 3.5. So at one time this thing probably had a crash and bent the nose a little bit. I mean, it's not horrible, but the good news is that relative to the casting and the bearings, I have only about a couple tenths up and down movement, and that's probably indicative that the bearings themselves are adjusted correctly. And the wobble, there's going to be a slight wobble, which I don't think it's going to affect the balance of the wheels. When you dress the face of the wheels, that will be self-correcting. If I ever do any face grinding, I'll have to dress the face of the wheel as well to get those to run true. But hey, what do you want for 250 bucks? I still think that the machine's in pretty amazing condition. Trying to do just a quick cleanup, make sure there's no grit anywhere that there shouldn't be. And it's interesting how the machine comes apart. There's a feed screw that is self-contained kind of in this tube with the bronze Acme nut at the back. And then the long table travel rod with a little gearbox on the front. And that all is going to be pretty easy to clean up. All of the way protectors are held in with these teeny tiny little, I don't know, probably about number 8 flathead screws. There's a couple of them broken off and I can't get them out, like the one at the front of this is broken off. I may re-engineer this. I see no reason that these have to be screws. Once these are in place, I'm thinking of drilling this out a little bit and just putting spring pins in, roll pins that have the split in them. Let those spring pins stick out a ½ inch or so that they can be removed. That way these way pieces can be pulled on and off to do some cleaning. There was a somewhat amateurish job, people hacking at this to attempt to give it some oil retention. Not real happy with that, but it is what it is. And that oil groove appears to be handmade as well. So we'll clean this up, stone it, make sure there's no burrs. Maybe I'll try to use my carbide scraper to put some little bit better flaking in there for the oil, and we'll just do what we can to put it back in service. Although I'll tell you, this machine, the way it's cleaning up, it would be very easy to strip it down and do a full cosmetic rebuild, have it look pretty much like new. But I think the main objective for me right now is get it into service. I decided to disassemble my magnetic chuck, so I stoned up the base, removed and cleaned out all of these flathead screws that go all the way through into the top. And I am trying to carefully separate the two pieces. This is a Brown and Sharp permanent magnet style chuck, lever activated. Well, number 618, I'm going to take a wild guess that that's a 6x18. For those of you who've never taken a permanent magnet chuck apart, 3 words I would not use to describe it are easy, fun, and safe, because getting the magnets to release from the backplate was a task. I had to clamp it down, and then using non-metallic levers, wood, get it picked up to a point where I could get something in between the magnets and the base. And I think at this point I can, by hand, rock it off of this and then get it set onto the wood. Got to make sure there's no metal anywhere near this, or it's going to start attracting filings and chips. Then I need to get it cleaned up. The stack height of the magnets is only 20/1000ths of an inch less than the clearance between the top and bottom. And when I took this apart, the magnet stack was stuck to the base, and it was floating underneath the top surface, the working surface. I think it's supposed to be stuck to the working surface, you know, logic would say, and give stronger attraction that way. So I'm going to see if I can get this moved over here onto these 2 2x4s and cleaned up. Okay. One nice thing about the operation is it's fairly easy to stick things to it to hold the wrapping in place, keep it clean. And the first thing to clean up should probably be this base plate, and that'll be the last thing to go on. Before I took everything apart, I had gone through and stoned the back side of this really well. It was pretty corroded. Little bit of pitting along this edge, but pretty good in the center. And all held together with 4, 6, 8, 10 long flathead screws, and then 6 dowels. You got a really large burr right here. I think that's a step down right there. So was I clear that this is not a how to recondition a magnetic chuck video? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I took this apart mainly to ensure that there was no corrosion from coolant and everything inside, and it was in good condition, but it had a lot of black gunky grease, so not easy to disassemble, not easy to clean. I don't think it's going to be easy to reassemble, but my plan, first of all, instead of relying on grease, I've read a couple of posts on Practical Machinist that heavyweight gear oil is better to use in this, so I'm going to go with that. However, for the pivot and for the locking mechanism, I am going to stick with a grease, and I'm going to put a light coating of grease on the faces of the magnet before it goes in. And then I'm going to pre-fill the bottom, which is actually the top because I got this inverted, with about 3/8 of an inch of the gear oil. And I'm going to do that because as I engage the actuating tab here on the cam, I'm going to lower this down until it's resting on the copper pipe. Obviously, you know, nothing got to be magnetic. I've got everything clamped so that this thing can't hop off the table. And then my last action after I put the gear oil in is going to be removing the copper pipe, and the gear oil should prevent the faces of the magnet from slamming down into the bottom, because it takes time to squish oil out of the way of anything. So this is called the hydrostatic squeeze films. If you want to read up on that, that is what this phenomenon is supposed to do and take advantage of. So I'm going to do a final cleaning of the faces here. And this is the lower face. I'm going to put a very, very light coating of the gear case lubricant on each of these. And this is a very light-bodied grease. It's kind of an oily grease. I don't even know if I'd call it a, number 1 grease, because like a number 2 grease is what you typically see on the, in your grease cartridges. So this is a very light grease, almost flows. And then this will provide, some initial lubrication on the faces of these. And when I invert this, the gear oil will be basically in contact with all of the plates here and will lubricate on the opposite side, on the foot of this. I'm going to seal the foot with Permatex spray gasket you'd like use on your cars. So there's a little bit of coating of the gear case lubricant. I've got this pre-lubed on the cam. I'm going to go ahead and pour in some amount of this, enough to cover the surfaces. I'm going to do this relatively quickly because the this joint is not really sealed real well, and I don't want it to start seeping out onto my bench. So let's go for broke here. And I'm waiting for this to coat the entire surface. I think we're there. Okay, that end is engaged. I'm going to slowly work towards the back end here. Not a lot of room for fingers, I'll tell you what. Now, for just the sake of containing any splash, I'm going to cover this. Well, I guess there's no danger in holding by the sides of this. So let's do that. Let's do that, and we'll lower it as much as we can by hand and let gravity do the rest. Well, nice and anticlimactic, that's what I was after. I've got some Permatex high-tack gasket sealant. Also fills small gaps. I'm going to paint this surface a couple times and also on the mating surface. Wonderful, this stuff pulls strings everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and get my lubricant on this surface for the cover. I call it a cover, but it's the base. And while I have this accessible, I'm going to add a little bit more oil so that I'm at a depth of 3/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch was what the guys on Practical Machinists were recommending. I give a quick wipe down to the base. There's a witness line on this that shows that this is the end that was up at the front where the actuator is. Wondering how many of you have seen one of these screwdrivers called a Tuffy. It's an oldie. My dad had these, had 3 of them. Managed to lose one somehow. And I think it was the biggest one, which would have come in handy here. I'll show you why it's such a neat screwdriver to have for cases like this. Okay, why Tuffy screwdrivers are so cool. That is why right there. Built-in fold-out lever. I got a couple of dowels here that are not wanting to seat nicely. So let's go ahead and pop those guys down. I'm going to have to give it a little bit more of a persuasive hit. Pass the stone over those and make sure they're flush or better. This one is not going down much. Tell you what, if I left some grit in the hole, I would rather hit that with a disc grinder and just make sure that it's below the surface. Every other one feels pretty good. I don't think my file's going to touch it. Believe it or not, it is. Well, there we go. Seems to work pretty good. Well, I hope you enjoyed that introduction to the Abrasive number 1.5 surface grinder. Just doing some initial cleanup and light rehab on the things that are easy to do. I'd like to just basically get this thing pretty much into service. So I'm not going, whole restoration on it by any means, but trying to improve a few areas where I can. We'll continue on with the gearbox for the table in and out feed in the next video and see how far we get on putting the front and back travel, the sub table I guess you'd call it, back in place. I don't know if I'm going to clean and paint that or not. We'll just see how it goes, how things go. But and I'll show you how the magnetic chuck came out as well. I just put that on the Cincinnati grinder to do some initial testing with that. I'm not going to grind the surface of the magnetic chuck on the tool and cutter grinder. I want to grind it on this so that it's true to the travel of this table. So hope you enjoyed it. Back again next week with another video. I skipped a week because we were laying the optical fiber cable from this building over to the house, and that was some pretty intense few days just getting cleared and trenched and lay out the cable and getting it in the trench and getting it covered back up. So that just was an absolute bear of a job, but we got it knocked out. So we'll give you an update on that when it's appropriate as well. Thanks again for watching and subscribing. Back to you next week with more regular content. And until then, as always, from Engineers Workshop, stay safe.